Helen Carter had spent the last 15 years serving food she knew she could cook better. Every morning, she tied her apron, stepped into the bustling kitchen of Donovan's diner, and watched younger waitresses get hired, promoted, and moved up the ranks, while she stayed exactly where she was. A 55-year-old waitress in a small-town diner. Overlooked, underpaid, and completely invisible. She knew every inch of that kitchen like the back of her hand. She had memorized every regular's order before they even sat down. But none of it mattered. Because to Rick Donovan, the greasy-haired owner with a sharp tongue and an even sharper temper, she was just another replaceable worker. And Helen had learned not to expect anything more. Until the night everything changed. It was a slow Tuesday evening, the kind where the fluorescent lights hummed louder than the conversations. Helen had just set down a plate of overcooked meatloaf when she overheard two customers at the counter. "This place used to be better," one muttered, pushing his food around with a fork. "Yeah," the other agreed. "Ever since they changed suppliers, everything tastes bland. The old fried chicken was the only reason I came here." Helen's hands froze over the coffee pot. She knew exactly what they were talking about. For years, Donovan's diner had served fried chicken made from a hand-battered recipe that Helen herself had perfected, a variation of a dish her grandmother used to make. It was the one item on the menu that had ever gotten real praise. Then, last month, Rick had cut costs. He switched to a frozen, mass-produced version, claiming nobody will notice the difference. But they had. The customers noticed. The sales were dropping. And Helen could have fixed it, if only Rick had cared to listen. So she did something she had never done before. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked straight into the kitchen, and interrupted Rick mid-conversation. "I need to talk to you." Rick barely looked up from his clipboard. "Make it quick, Carter. I'm busy." Helen took a deep breath. "The menu is failing. Because the food isn't good anymore. You know it. The customers know it. Let me make my fried chicken again, the way it used to be." Rick snorted, finally looking at her. "Helen, let me remind you of something," he said, leaning against the counter with a smirk. "You're a waitress, not a chef. Your job is to serve, not to think." The words hit her like a slap. 15 years of hard work, loyalty, dedication. And this was how he saw her? She set down the coffee pot. Carefully, deliberately. "I could cook better than anything on this menu." Rick laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh yeah?" He crossed his arms. "You think you're some kind of culinary genius? Face it, Carter. If you knew how to run a restaurant, you wouldn't be stuck here wiping down tables for tips." Helen's face burned. She should have backed down. She always backed down. But not this time. She straightened her shoulders, met his gaze, and said the one thing that changed everything. "If I had my own place, I'd put you out of business in 6 months." The room went dead silent. Rick's smile faded. Helen didn't know where the words had come from. But the second they left her mouth, she knew they were true. And judging by the flicker of doubt in Rick's eyes, so did he. Rick's smirk twisted into something colder. "All right then," he said, tossing his clipboard onto the counter with a loud slap. "If you think you're so damn talented, let's see you prove it." Helen barely had time to process his words before he fired her on the spot. Just like that, 15 years of loyalty meant nothing. The customers barely looked up. The kitchen staff didn't say a word. And as Helen untied her apron, nobody stopped her. She walked out into the cold night air, expecting to feel shattered. But instead, she felt free. Reality hit hard the next morning. She sat at the tiny kitchen table in her one-bedroom apartment, staring at her final paycheck, barely enough to cover rent. No savings. No backup plan. No idea what came next. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through job listings. Minimum 2 years of experience required. Looking for energetic candidates in a fast-paced environment. Seeking fresh talent with new ideas. Helen clenched her jaw. She wasn't stupid, she knew exactly what those words meant. No one wanted to hire a 55-year-old waitress with no degree. She closed her laptop. For years, she had convinced herself that this was the best she could do. That women like her, middle-aged, divorced, no college degree, weren't meant for more. Then she thought about the way Rick had laughed at her. How he had dismissed her like she was nothing. How he had treated her like she was disposable. Helen's hands tightened into fists. No. She wasn't disposable. She wasn't finished. She wasn't going to let him be right. But where did she even start? That afternoon, as she wandered through town, she noticed a handwritten sign posted on a small food truck parked near the farmer's market. Vendor spots available. Got a recipe? Make it happen. Helen stopped in her tracks. She read the sign again. Her grandmother's fried chicken recipe. The one that had kept customers coming back for years. The one that had made Donovan's diner famous before Rick ruined it. What if? She pulled out her last paycheck, rubbing the worn edges between her fingers. It wasn't much. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start something new. A slow smile spread across her face. Rick thought he had ended her story. He had no idea she was about to start a whole new chapter. Helen had no business experience. No investors. No clue how to start a food business. But she had a recipe. And that was enough. The next week was a blur of trial and error, late nights, and sheer determination. She cashed her final paycheck, bought the cheapest second-hand fryer she could find, and rented a vendor spot at the town's weekly farmer's market. She set up a tiny stall with a handwritten sign. Carter's fried chicken. The best you'll ever have. The first morning was a disaster. She underestimated how much oil she needed. The fryer overheated. Her first batch came out too greasy, the second too dry. A few curious customers stopped by, but most just walked past. Doubt crept in. Maybe Rick was right. Maybe she was just a waitress who had gotten too big for her own good. And then, the first customer took a bite. It was an older man, someone who had eaten at Donovan's diner for years. He chewed slowly, his face unreadable. Helen held her breath. Then he looked up. This is it. He grinned. This is the fried chicken I remember. Better, even. Word spread fast. By noon, people were coming by, asking if this was the same fried chicken Donovan's diner used to serve before they changed recipes. By the end of the day, she had a line stretching down the sidewalk. That night, she collapsed onto her couch, exhausted, smelling like grease and seasoning, but she didn't care. She had made more money in one day than she had in a week at Donovan's. But more than that, she had proof. Proof that she wasn't just a waitress. Proof that she could do this. She stared at the empty fryer, her mind racing. If she could do this in a single day, what could she build in a year? She didn't know it yet. But Carter's fried chicken was about to become bigger than she ever imagined. Helen worked harder than she ever had in her life. She woke up before sunrise to prep ingredients, spent the day frying chicken until her arms ached, and stayed up late crunching numbers, figuring out how to stretch every dollar. The farmer's market was just the beginning. Word spread. People started coming from other towns just to try the fried chicken better than Donovan's. Local food bloggers took notice. A customer posted a TikTok video of her golden, crispy chicken fresh out of the fryer, and within days, the video exploded. Hundreds of thousands of views. Thousands of comments. Where is this place? I need this chicken now. This looks better than anything from a restaurant chain. Forget KFC, I want Carter's fried chicken. Orders skyrocketed. The tiny food stall was no longer enough. Helen had to think bigger. She scraped together her savings and bought a second-hand food truck. It wasn't much, the paint was peeling, the fryer barely worked, and the inside smelled like burnt oil. But it was hers. Her first night working the food truck, she parked it downtown, hoping a few people would show up. By 7 p.m., there was a line down the block. By 9 p.m., she was completely sold out. Helen looked out at the crowd, people waiting in the cold just to eat something she had made with her own hands. It hit her then. She wasn't just running a food truck. She was building a brand. And the best part? Rick Donovan had no idea. Yet. It didn't take long for Rick Donovan to notice. Helen's food truck was becoming a sensation. Everywhere she went, people followed. They posted about her fried chicken, shared photos, and tagged her business on social media. Her brand was gaining momentum, and she hadn't even realized the full impact yet. Then, one cold evening, as Helen packed up the truck after another sellout night, Rick pulled up in his car. His face was tight, his usually confident demeanor now replaced by something like desperation. She didn't want to deal with him. She didn't owe him anything. But there he was, standing across from her food truck, arms crossed. I guess you're doing well. Rick's voice was flat, but Helen could see the frustration behind his words. Helen smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. Better than I expected. Rick sneered, looking at the truck with disdain. I never thought you could pull it off. But you know, this doesn't last forever. These food trends come and go. Helen's smile didn't falter. She knew what he was trying to do. Trying to belittle her success. Trying to remind her of her place. But this time, she wasn't buying it. You're right, she said slowly, her voice steady. Food trends do come and go. But good food, Rick? That lasts. Rick's expression darkened. This was the part he couldn't understand. Helen wasn't just a flash in the pan. She had a story, a legacy to build. And she wasn't going to let him tear it down. Well, we both know how hard this business can be. You can only fry chicken for so long before it gets old. Helen stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You might be right, Rick. But let's see what happens when you've been doing it wrong for too long. Rick took a step back, clearly agitated. Look, he snapped, if you're going to keep doing this, at least work with me. Let's put our heads together and you can get a real spot in the city. You can expand, I'll help you get more resources. Just sell me your recipe. Helen laughed softly. It was the same offer he'd made a year ago. Back then, she would have been grateful for a chance like this. Now, she saw it for what it was, desperation. I don't need your help, Rick, she said, her voice firm. I already have everything I need to make it on my own. Your diner? It's done. Rick froze. Helen saw it, the look of shock in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to turn down his offer. Helen walked away without another word, leaving him standing there, watching her. Because the truth was, Helen wasn't just building a food truck. She was building something that could take down everything Rick had built. And she knew exactly what she was going to do next. Months passed, and Carter's fried chicken grew faster than Helen had ever imagined. The food truck became a mobile empire, expanding into new cities with a cult following. As her brand gained more attention, Helen had opened 2 small brick-and-mortar locations, each bustling with customers. She didn't just serve food, she served community, memories, and the authenticity she had worked so hard to reclaim. But the real breakthrough came when a national food critic posted a glowing review of her fried chicken, calling it the most satisfying bite you'll have all year. It didn't take long for the big players to notice. One night, as Helen prepared for another busy shift, her phone rang. It was a blocked number, but she answered anyway. Helen Carter? The voice on the other end was smooth, confident. My name's Tom Daniels. I represent a group of investors interested in your business. Helen's heart raced. What can I do for you? We've been watching your growth closely. We believe your brand has national potential, and we'd like to discuss an opportunity to partner up. Helen listened carefully as he outlined the terms. He spoke of millions of dollars, expansion, and the chance to take Carter's fried chicken to every major city in the country. They were offering to buy a significant stake in her business, with the option for a full buyout if she was interested. Helen knew what they were really offering, a chance to make it huge. A chance to turn her humble food truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. It sounded perfect. The money, the connections, the ability to take her recipe to the masses. But something about it didn't sit right with her. She put the phone on speaker and called Emma, her daughter, who had been working with her from day one. What do you think? Helen asked. They want to invest in Carter's fried chicken. This could be the opportunity of a lifetime. Emma, always the realist, sighed. Mom, it's a great opportunity. But I know you. You've been building this from the ground up. Do you really want to give up control? Are they offering you something you can't already get on your own? Helen hesitated. Emma was right. She didn't need them. She had already proven that. She had built this empire herself, and she wasn't about to hand over the reins to someone who didn't understand what made her brand so special. With that decision made, Helen called Tom back. I appreciate the offer, she said, her voice steady. But I'm not looking to sell. Carter's fried chicken will remain independent. There was a long pause on the other end. Are you sure? Tom asked. We can make you an offer you won't be able to refuse. Helen smiled. I already have everything I need. I don't want to be bought. I want to keep growing. She hung up the phone, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made it this far on her own. There was no need to sell out now. And then, she heard it, the sound of a horn honking. She turned to see her old food truck, now covered in a fresh coat of paint, sitting proudly outside her newest restaurant location. Helen took a deep breath, looking around at the new staff preparing food, the customers eagerly lining up, and the buzz of excitement in the air. She had done it. She had created something that was hers, something that couldn't be bought or taken away. As she walked inside, her daughter met her at the door, smiling proudly. Mom, you really did it. This is just the beginning. Helen smiled back. Yeah, it is. Because Helen Carter didn't just build a business, she had built a legacy. And the best part? She was just getting started. As the months passed, Helen's empire grew beyond her wildest dreams. The food truck had turned into a chain of successful restaurants, with lines of customers waiting to taste the now famous Carter's fried chicken. The menu expanded, with new items created by Helen herself, each paying homage to the family recipes passed down through generations. But success wasn't without its challenges. The day came when the local press called for an interview, and Helen was faced with the same people who had doubted her from the start. The media asked her how it felt to be running a multi-million-dollar business, and whether it felt sweet to see Donovan's diner collapse under Rick's poor management. She smiled softly, her hands folded on the table. "It's not about revenge," she said. It's about showing up when no one expects you to. It's about taking what's rightfully yours, and not just for yourself, but for all the women who were told they were too old, too slow, too invisible." The reporter, surprised by her calmness, pushed a little further, asking about Rick Donovan. "Do you ever think about reaching out to him? Maybe offering him a deal, or even offering to help his failing diner?" Helen paused. She thought about it for a moment, the years she had spent working for him, the pain of being dismissed, of having her talents ignored. She had earned every ounce of her success, but at what cost? "I've learned that success isn't always about taking someone else's place," Helen replied, her voice steady. "It's about creating a place where everyone has the chance to stand tall." The reporter nodded, but Helen's mind drifted back to Rick. She remembered the moment he fired her, the sneer on his face as he told her she would never amount to anything more than a waitress. It was that moment that pushed her to prove him wrong. But now, standing in the heart of her own restaurant, surrounded by her team, Helen realized something: she didn't need to prove anything to Rick. Her legacy wasn't about revenge. It was about leaving a mark for others to follow. And with that thought, Helen decided not to reach out to Rick. Instead, she used her success to empower women like her, creating scholarships for women U50+ to enter the culinary world. She didn't want to buy Donovan's diner, or even give Rick a second chance. Instead, she wanted to build something new, something that would outlast both Rick's failures and her own past. With the click of a button, Helen signed the contract for her new nonprofit organization, the Carter Foundation, dedicated to empowering women in business, offering mentorship and training to those who had been overlooked or dismissed. She didn't need Rick to acknowledge her success, she needed to acknowledge the women who would follow her. As she left the office, she paused in front of the large windows of her restaurant, looking out at the world she had built with her own hands. The future was hers, not because she took something from anyone, but because she created something that had never existed before. And that was true success. This story isn't just about Helen's rise from a small-town waitress to a successful businesswoman, it's about resilience, self-worth, and the power of perseverance. Helen was told time and time again that she would never be more than just a waitress. She was dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. But she refused to let others define her. Through hard work, grit, and unwavering belief in herself, Helen created a business empire and used her success to empower others, especially women who have been pushed aside by society. This story shows us that age, gender, and past failures don't define us. It's our determination and our willingness to keep going when others say we can't that truly determine our future. But what do you think? Did Helen make the right choice to build something new and empower other women, or should she have considered a different approach to dealing with Rick? Comment 2 if you loved how Helen took control of her life, and 7 if you think she should have handled it differently. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the characters in this story. And if you enjoyed this story of overcoming obstacles, resilience, and turning the tables, make sure to like this video and subscribe to True Tales. Natalie will bring you more inspiring stories every day that you don't want to miss.